Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name's Matt Miller. I'm from Game Informer. I'm the senior previews editor over there, and I've had the good fortune to do some coverage of the Outer Worlds before this E3. My colleagues and I went out to visit Obsidian several months back. Some of you guys may have read the cover story that resulted from that, where we got to talk with the developers and see the game in action really early on and learn a bunch of stuff about it. It was great. And so I've been really fortunate to have a chance to cover the game, and we wanted today to blow that out to everybody else out there, including those of you here in our live audience. I guess let's get started then, and welcome onto stage, if you'll put your hands together and welcome our guests from Obsidian, Leonard Boyarsky and Brian Hines. So I am especially pleased that Leonard Boyarsky could join us today. As most of you know, he's been pivotal in bringing life to a lot of our favorite gaming universes over the years, including projects as wide-reaching as Fallout and Diablo. And along with Tim Kaine, Leonard is the co-director on The Outer Worlds.
Yep.
Welcome, Leonard.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you guys for showing up.
Also with us today is Brian Hines. Brian Hines is senior designer at Obsidian, working on The Outer Worlds. He's played central roles on other Obsidian projects, awesome stuff like Tyranny, Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, and South Park: The Stick of Truth. And before his time at Obsidian, Brian worked on projects like Bully and Earth and Beyond.
Thank you for having me.
So for today's panel, I'm told that Obsidian's ready to share a similar demo with everybody here to what we in the press saw during the course of the show. Although I think you guys are showing different versions of it, so we'll get to see what version of it that you're showing today in terms of the way we play through it.
Yep.
The demo includes some new locations and experiences in the game that haven't been seen before now. And after we get a chance to look at the demo, we'll use the rest of our time to talk through what was shown, including some questions, which I hope will offer a little bit greater insight into exactly what we can expect from The Outer Worlds when it releases this October. Leonard, do you want to get us started and maybe share a little bit about The Outer Worlds for somebody who's just like maybe not familiar with the project yet?
Sure. It's a pulpy sci-fi RPG where you play a space captain or a space villain. It's up to you. The game is all about reacting to your choices and letting you play whatever kind of character you want. This game, the first game, hopefully of many, takes place in the Halcyon colony, and it is a colony that's owned and operated by corporations. Brian's going to tell us a little bit more about a planet that's not part of that. But you were on a space colony spaceship that got knocked off course. So you arrived about 70 years late. You get unfrozen by a scientist who's there to get you to help him hopefully save the colony and save the other people on the ship. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about Monarch and what we're going to be seeing in the demo?
Yeah, so the demo takes place on one of the planets in the Halcyon system, Monarch. It's actually one that is kind of more wild and untamed. There's a lot of it's not very well regulated. It's not really part of the corporate system for reasons we'll talk about when we go through the demo. But it's basically an area where you're sent because there's things you need for the greater story that take you to Monarch. And you have to deal with the various factions that have built up on the planet that, with absence of the corporate board's control, have really gained power and are now fighting for dominance on this world. So,
Awesome.
Yeah. Great. Let's go ahead and kick off the demo, I guess. Okay, so what we're showing you here is basically a work-in-progress dev build. This is about a week old, so you're seeing practically the same thing as what the dev team is currently working on back at Obsidian. We're starting off in the town of Fallbrook, which is on the world of Monarch, which we were just talking about a little bit before. And one of the things you're going to see throughout this demo, and that Leonard talked about a little bit, was one of the things that we at Obsidian are very passionate about is the idea of player choice and giving the players the tools through their actions and choices in quests and dialogues and how they build their character through leveling to really drive the story forward with their choices and make the game their own. And we kind of think that what our job is at Obsidian is to create those dynamic characters with backstories and interesting dialogue and create tense, morally gray, complex situations, and we put the player in that, and through their choices, they either save the colony, destroy it, or just kill everyone, like a lot of our players like to do. So the town of Fallbrook is kind of a haven for vice on this world. Whether it's drinking, drugs, gambling, whatever your vice is, you can buy it here in Fallbrook, and it's for sale by the Sublight Salvage and Shipping Corporation, which is a totally legitimate business and not at all a front for organized crime. So no need to worry about that at all. The town of Fallbrook is run by a woman named Catherine Malin. What we're seeing here is Malin's House of Hospitality, though there is a disclaimer that hospitality is not guaranteed. We're here trying to raise some funds. There's a larger goal we're on the world for, and we're going to see if Catherine might have a job for us. So,
Catherine's great, ain't she? She'll pull you out of the sulfur, so long as you don't mind being in her debt.
Come for vice or virtue? Because we only sell one
so
here.
when we first come and start talking to Catherine, obviously we're new to this world, new to this area. She doesn't really know too much about us, and she's not going to trust us right off the bat.
I do have a delicate
and this is
matter
kind of showing,
when needs attending,
basically,
since
as you develop your character, you unlock different
But how
dialogue
am I to know
options
whether
based
you're
on the
alive,
skills and
if
attributes
not
that you
fully
use to develop your
trustworthy?
character. Some things, maybe you, if you put points into being able to intimidate people, you might be able to strong-arm Catherine and get her to work with you more directly. But she does run a criminal organization, so she's not that easy to intimidate. But we're a pretty charming bastard, so we can use that to get her on our side.
Against my better judgment, I do believe you.
Again, based on how you develop
There's
your
a Borscht
character, different
factory on up
options
the
will
way,
unlock for
run
you
by
in
a man who
conversations.
calls himself the
And
King.
in some cases,
Clive
entirely new
Lumber,
branches of quests will be
insufferable
available only if you have the right
That
skills
aside,
to
it's a
access them.
business right
And in some
for the
cases,
pluck.
entire quests will only be
I
available
want
based
it.
on the choices that
Clear
you've
as
made
that.
previously in the game. Now, what Catherine's basically telling
Stars,
us
I
here
hope
is
so.
she's got a
Clive
problem on this
Lumber,
world. There
the
is a guy named
self-proclaimed
Clive
Borscht
Lumber
King of Monarch,
who's running a
is
factory
swimming in
that
profit
is making a profit.
and drowning in his
and
ego.
She is running a criminal
He's
organization.
making
She
the
wants a
only
cut of
meal
that
to be
profit.
had this side
And this
of
guy's
Monarch,
not playing along.
and I'm tired of
obviously
ponying
that
up
can't
for my
stand.
dinner. I
So
want that Borscht
she's giving us
factory
a few
owner
ideas
dead or
about how we
alive.
can go through and resolve this problem
And you're the
in her
soon-to-be
favor.
handsomely paid fucker who's gonna get it for me.
We are an M-rated game, so there's a few
If you got
some
brass
salty language
knockers,
here
you
and
can
there
shoot your
throughout
way through the front
throughout the
gate.
game.
If you don't fancy getting shot to shit, you can try
So one of the
asking
things
Duncan
about our
for a
conversations is that we
disguise.
try very much to
Might be another
give our
way
players
in,
options.
assuming you're
the type of player
courageous
who
enough to
wants to
track the
skip through
sewers.
dialogue and just
Boy,
right to
fine.
the run and gun gameplay, you
Hit
absolutely
'em
can
where
do
it
that.
hurts.
But if you
And his
choose
gut
to
or his
explore through the
production lines ought to
conversations,
make do.
use your skills, and talk through the options, you can often get a lot of hints about how to
Sometimes the
approach
simplest
quests
solution
and how
is
to
the
resolve
sweetest.
situations that you maybe
I
not be
don't
able to
give a
get
whit about
just
the
by going with
method
a
or
more
the
direct
means.
approach.
Just the end. It'll be more than good when you're finished.
Okay.
Maybe not for Clive, but for me and you, I'm sure.
So Catherine's given us kind of the lowdown of the situation, and she's given us a new side quest. One of the things
So
with a
what's
lot
the
of our
plan?
quest names, we try to do plays on some classic sci-fi titles. In this case, she's given us the Slaughterhouse Clive quest. So we're making that the active quest now in order to track our progress. In order to reach the Borscht factory, which is where the Clive Lumberg, who's the self-proclaimed
there's a woman
Borscht
who
King of
knows what she
Monarch,
wants.
that's
I
the
like
factory
her.
that he's running. We're going to
She's
have
fine.
to actually leave
Well,
the town of
so long
Fallbrook
as you ain't on
and
her
go
bad
through the
side.
overlands of
Then she's
Monarch.
liable to drown in the
Luckily, it's
waterfall.
not a tame or safe place to travel, but we do have some companions who are traveling with us, and we're kind of showing that so those companions here. The first of those is Nyoka. She's a new companion that we're showing for the first time here at E3. We haven't talked much about her before. She's a native of the planet of Monarch and a big game hunter. And we also have Ellie, who is a doctor of sorts. At least that's her history, though she's turned recently more to a life of piracy for reasons that you'll discover as you play through the game. So the two of them are going to be traveling with us, and we'll see more of their abilities later on. Now, Monarch's not safe, so we need to make sure we have the right equipment in order to deal with any problems that might arise. So we're going to show you some of the weapons we have on this character. And when we're talking about choice at Obsidian, it's not just what dialogue options you pick or what quests you take or how you resolve those quests. Again, it's really about how you choose to develop your character in what tools you unlock to play the game the way you want to play it and drive the story forward and make it your own. On this character build, we've actually been focusing more on our technology skills, so things like engineering
Time
and
for a
science.
round of whist.
And engineering has
round of
allowed us to
whiskey.
modify
Or
our
both.
weapons and armor to basically
Drinking,
customize them to
gambling,
adhere
and
more to our own
organized
play
crime.
style. And we've been using our science skill to tinker with the level of our weapons and armor, making them more powerful so they last longer throughout the game. So if you find a weapon early on that you really love, you can use your skills to progress it along with your character and use it throughout the game. So we're now on the Monarch Overlands, and basically the history of this world is the corporate board planned on making Monarch the homeworld, the capital of the colony, and terraforming it to really be like the crown jewel in the Halcyon colony. The idea was that the terraforming process would wipe out the native plants and animals and replace them with Earth species. And that didn't work out the way they planned at all. Instead of being wiped out, the native plants and animals got a lot bigger, a lot tougher, and a lot meaner and much more aggressive. And as a result of that, the corporate board decided to abandon the planet of Monarch, along with all of the native, all the colonists who are currently living there. So, unfortunately for them, one of the corporations decided to remain behind. That was Monarch Stellar Industries, and they used a loophole in corporate law to claim the planet as their own and rename it after themselves. And that really pissed off the board because they basically lost an entire planet in this system, and they decided to embargo the world and do whatever they can to basically make life miserable for the people on this world. So what we're seeing right here, we've come across a blockade on the road, and we're seeing what we call our tactical time dilation system. Basically, your character, as Leonard mentioned, have been traveling from Earth to this colony for way longer than intended, over 70 years. As a result, you're suffering from what we call hibernation sickness, which gives the ability to kind of slow down our perception of time. It may be a side effect of brain damage, but it's a positive one. So let's look at it on the bright side there. So the great thing about this is it allows us to really slow down combat before it starts and observe our enemies and learn something about their strengths and weaknesses, and then really start off combat with a bang. So that's Nayoka again, demonstrating one of her companion abilities. So in this character, beyond just focusing on our technology skills, we've also focused on leadership, which is one of the archetypes of gameplay that we have here in the outer world. Leadership is basically where you're focusing your skills more on improving your companions, making them more stronger and more durable in combat, and less on making yourself the toughest. And because we put enough points into leadership, we've unlocked those companion abilities, which you can use from combat to combat. Like the abilities and tactical time dilation both regenerate quickly outside of combat. So looks like we found, this is a random encounter that can spawn. These are one of the native species of Monarch, the mantisaurs. Before the terraforming process, they were just a tiny little insect species, not a threat to anybody. And then of course terraforming happened and they grew giant, bigger than human beings, very, very territorial and a really tough fight. So we're gonna kind of sneak our way past there, try to avoid drawing their attention because we would not survive that fight. And come up to another blockade on the road here. Again, this is not a safe or tame area of the colony by any means. And we've got some more marauders here who've created a blockade. Because we've been putting points into our weapon skills on this character build, beyond just increasing the overall effectiveness of our weapons, we've also unlocked the ability to do location-based hits and effects while we're in tactical time dilation. So that's what we're demonstrating here. If you shoot somebody in the arm, you can maim them, prevent them being able to use whatever weapon they're holding there. If you shoot them in the head, if you don't kill them outright, you can blind an enemy. And if you shoot them in the leg, you can cripple them. So melee enemies, you can slow them down, so it takes them longer to reach you. And we're going to start off by crippling them. Or shooting them in the crotch and weakening them. That works.
Nice one.
Mark is driving them, always looking for the crotch shot. It's disturbing. So one of the great things about tactical time dilation is that for players who may be more familiar with RPG mechanics and aren't as comfortable with FPS gameplay, by investing more in skills and perks that improve tactical time dilation, they can slow down the pace of combat and really make it work for them so that they can approach combat more tactically in a way that they're more familiar with. So which Mark's just showing off. The actual world of Monarch is actually a moon orbiting a gas giant named Olympus, so he was showing that off there a second ago. So we are getting close to the Borst factory here, and we're kind of getting a preview of the front gate. There's a decent number of enemies there, and if we've been focusing on our combat skills, we could probably just go in guns blazing, and this would be a combat challenge we could handle without much of a problem. We've been focusing more on other skills with this character build, so we can kind of look at some other options. When we were talking to Catherine, one of the options she gave us was the idea that you could sneak in through the sewers, which we're going to go see if we can try and find that sewer entrance here. And Mark's going to kind of take us around some of the canids that you're seeing there. That's another native species that's become very hostile and territorial. And every gamer knows the best things are found behind waterfalls, so we're going to go do that. Okay, so this is the sewer pipe entrance. You can tell by the red glow that this is actually a locked hatch. They're very secure about their sewers here at the Borst factory. Unfortunately for this character, we have not been putting points into lockpicking, so we can't actually use that to go into the build. I think the demo we ran for you, we actually went in through the sewers.
Yeah,
right?
this is like different now that you're leaving.
Okay.
Ah,
So yeah,
this
basically,
factory offers the
can't go into the
loveliest
sewers with
aromas.
this character.
Like if you cook
so Rhett can
boars
go through the
over a
front
sulfur
gate.
pit.
Again, don't really have the skills to go in directly to the combat. But on a previous quest, we actually picked up a device called the holographic shroud. It's kind of prototype technology that was developed for us by a scientist, actually the one that Leonard mentioned, freed us from hibernation. And the benefit of this is that it generates like a holographic disguise around our character, as long as we find the right items in the world to power it up first. So those restricted access hologram signs are kind of the visual clue to the player that this disguise is going to activate. It's not perfect, it's prototype technology, but generally enemies will be confused enough that they'll try and talk to us first before attacking.
You must be a part of the new line shift. Don't tell me you lost your key card already. A lost card's worth 2 infractions, you know.
So that's kind of what's happening here, and again, showing off that when we're in a conversation, these kind of cases with the holographic shroud, we're not attacked outright. We can try and talk our way through the situation, and based on how we put points into our character skills, we have different options. Here, we don't have the ability to really
I think I did hear something about
persuade or
that.
intimidate our way through, but
All
we can
right,
lie and
okay.
say, you know, first day on the job, we haven't gotten a key card yet. Come on, let us in. And it's simple enough that at this point we can do that. Now at the bottom of the screen, you can see there's a meter that's slowly draining. Basically, our holographic shroud it's not perfect. It slowly degrades as you move around the space, so you're not able to just walk wherever you want to. There's a limited amount of time that the disguise will be sustained for. And it also affects your companions, as you saw there. They actually got holographic armor applied to them that makes them look like they fit into the world the same way you do. So we have various corporate-themed products being advertised as you're loading into various areas. And we're now inside the factory looking for Clive. And again, we're seeing one of these restricted access signs. So our hologram will activate, and because this is a new area, it's had time to regenerate. So the meter is full again, and which allows us to move past this mechanical sentry, which normally would just attack us outright, but is also confused by the disguise and will just ignore us. So we're coming to one of my favorite parts of the demo. You just get to watch people's reactions as I explain what's going on here. One of the things that Obsidian we think makes the Outer Worlds a very special game.
You know, the more
it's one
of those
that
Spectrum bottles I
basically
drink,
combines our
the less I'm
passion
able to
for
differentiate their
choice
colors.
and reactivity with Leonard and Tim's love of dark humor and dark outlook on the life. And these are, basically we're looking at the Cysty Pig pens. And Cysty Pigs kind of embody that dark humor. They're creatures that have been engineered to produce delicious bacon-flavored tumors. Exactly. And as those tumors grow ripe and juicy, they fall off the pigs and can be harvested and turned into various borscht-related products, like borscht and beans, borscht pockets, and borschtwurst. And you haven't tried the worst until you've tried borschtwurst. So we're going through the Cysty Pig pens here, trying to see if we can make our way through without being discovered. It looks like we're going to be caught by this mechanical here.
Not found.
So again, because we have our holographic disguise, we're not attacked outright. We can talk our way through the situation. And it's not often you can intimidate a robot, so we're going to go and use that approach.
This unit is not experiencing errors. Error. This unit is functioning correctly. There is no need for the intervention of mechanical engineers. Thank you for your cooperation.
So in this world, even robots want to avoid a trip to the doctor. So here, we'll talk your way past that. Again, because we survived that interrogation without alerting the enemies, our disguise was able to regenerate. But you can see that there's like 3 marks by the disguise meter at the bottom of the screen. We only get like 3 chances to talk our way past through a different area. So, and each time the dialogue checks get harder and harder. So you really need to focus on your dialogue skills if you want to use your disguise to get through these dangerous situations. So here we've reached the control room for the canning facility. So the canning floor is where those delicious bacon tumors get processed into the various products and sold throughout the world of Monarch. And this gives us a great overview of the factory floor and allows us to really see what the enemies are. There's a decent number of guards and mechanicals there, as well as some workers who are wandering around. Now, that intercom, like if we've been focusing more on our dialogue skills, we might be able to talk our way past the situation. We've been focusing more on technology skills, and like, the first thing that we had Mark do is like bring the elevator to the ground floor so that we can reach Clive later on. And we've been focusing on hacking skill, and there's that pink slip protocol,
I think I soiled my
which, as you can see, changes the programming of the mechanicals. They've now been told to terminate the employment of the workers and factory workers, which they're taking very literally. So this is a bad day at the office for them, but a great opportunity for us. Now that there's chaos going on the canning floor, we'd have a better chance of making our way through. Poor guard there,
Aiming
poor
system
workers
failure.
hiding from the mechanicals. Wonder how long he'll survive.
Meter security.
So we got caught there, and Mark decided to go ahead and attack. In this case, we're using a heavy machine gun, which we've actually modified using mods we found throughout the world. This is now doing shock damage rather than the normal damage type, and shock damage is especially effective against mechanicals. Luckily, mechanicals are also focused on taking out the remainder of the employees, so both the guards who have survived and the mechanicals are distracted fighting each other, so we get a chance to take out a headshot, just take out one of the guards that way, and deal with the remaining threats in here.
They won't try that again.
That's correct. Oh, okay. So this is a live demo, so this is kind of showcasing one of the things that can happen as you're playing through the game. This is basically showing off our flaw system. And basically, while you're playing, the game is constantly monitoring what's happening to you and your party members. And based on the effects of what happens in combat or various situations, you might be offered a flaw. And the reason why this is a good thing for you is that if you decide to take a flaw, you get a bonus perk point, which allows you to power up your character beyond the normal process of leveling. Now, the cost of this, and this is the robophobia flaw, we apparently took enough damage from mechanicals in that combat to qualify for it, is that when you're fighting mechanicals in the future, you'll be afraid of them, so you'll suffer some penalties during combat. In this case, we're going to go and reject the flaw for the moment. We don't need to take one for this demo. But we've now dealt with the threats on the cannery floor, and we're going to make our way through the elevator up to speak with Clive. So again, Clive is the guy who runs this factory, and he's the one who's refusing to cooperate with Catherine back in Fallbrook. So she wants us to just shoot him in the face. Her favorite approach is a bullet. It's very direct. It's very no-nonsense. But we're not forced into that. Again, this is an RPG, and the story is one that you get to tell by what actions you take. So we're going to talk to Clive instead.
Whoa now. And just what do you figure you're doing up here? These are my private quarters, friend. I don't allow tours up here. I don't allow tours ever on deeper consideration.
So Clive's kind of a creepy guy. He's
Certain things
very much
require
into
a mess
making his
to
own
do well.
borscht by hand, which
See, I was just killing sometime. I prefer to prepare my dinner by my own hand. Nothing like fresh and bloody Borstwurst.
can't imagine why Catherine's having a problem with this guy. He seems totally sane and reasonable, not at all creepy.
I do own a factory known for specializing in the canning of Borstwurst. On occasion, I like to imbibe other parts of the cysty pig. Did you fancy me a cannibal? Perish the thought. No,
So this
I
is
don't
another
take
example of like
bodies,
the
I
dark humor we
disappear.
try to inject into
A
our
joke,
games.
that
That
last was.
even on something that this is kind
So,
of like a slice of life
what
side
can I
quest
do
of
for
the
you?
game, we want to
My
create characters that are
full
memorable, that you
attention
enjoy
is at
interacting
your
with,
disposal.
even if they're a little bit creepy.
I kind of liked it when his attention was elsewhere.
While I approve of your associate's cautious nature, I still teeter on the verge of losing my patience. Let us move forward with the present proceedings.
So again, Catherine sent us here to kill this guy, and we could always just choose to attack him outright. But we're not forced into doing that. This is our choice, our story, and we can talk to Clive and see if maybe he has a counteroffer for us.
By sublight, you mean Catherine, do you not? That greedy, star-crossed sow. Listen, friend. The Borst King of Monarch does not negotiate with coveters. How about you bring me Catherine's severed head, and I will gift you a lifetime supply of Borst.
Now, this is a pretty good offer. I mean, Catherine wants to give us money, which, let's be honest, money's always useful, but this is a lifetime supply of delicious bacon-flavored tumors. I mean, how do you pass that up? So at this point, we have a few options. We could attack Clive and honor our deal with Catherine. We could decide to betray Catherine and side with Clive instead. Or maybe we could find a way to get the two of them to work together. And if we had enough dialogue skill, that might be a viable option. What happens next is going to be entirely up to you. We're going to end the demo here, and when the game comes out in October of this year, you get to decide what happens to Clive and Catherine. You get to decide how the story moves forward and how the game shapes itself. Thank you all.
Thanks. Thank you, Brian. That was awesome.
Thank you.
That's great. It's neat to get to see it from a whole different perspective.
Definitely.
And see you guys go through a different way. I want to start a little bit with one of the things that I think has been most noted about the Outer Worlds, which is that a lot of recent RPGs have increasingly embraced co-op or even large-scale MMO-esque elements in the way that they have rolled out to players. But the Outer Worlds it's always been a single-player experience, by the way that I understand it. Why? What are some of the things that you can do and focus on in the player experience that are specific to a single-player game like this?
We really like the fact that you can get really deep and have a lot of complexity and texture to your story. A lot of times when you have a co-op or even a competitive multiplayer experience, it gets very frantic. You have to find people to play with who really want to experience the game the same way you do. And plus it's all about, I think at the core of it, it's really about your character and how your character is going to affect this world, and you're the hero, the space hero, if you will. So that's very important, and for you to be the center of this thing, it's better for you to be by yourself and telling your story. And also we wanted the companions to also feel like a part of your crew. So it would be just kind of water the whole thing down if there was multiple people playing at the same time. One of our focuses at Obsidian has always been deep story, and this just continues that tradition.
Sure. I think that following up on that, there's this idea that you have a certain tonal register that the Outer Worlds is going for in terms of the mix of humor and sort of dark ideas that are coming in here, but there's also some sort of pulp sci-fi. There's some commentary on capitalism maybe going on here. And I have to imagine that at least some of that has to be tricky when you're throwing it all to a single player to shape how it all comes out. I mean, how do you maintain that tonal consistency in the face of a player who can literally come in and shoot everybody?
Well, it's in the design itself. It's baked into it. As we're designing quests, as we're designing the main story, or all the stories in the game, we're always asking ourselves, what can the player do at these points? A lot of games, when they're being designed, the designers will want some very specific things to happen, very emotional beats to happen in a certain way. Because any story you're telling is linear. It has to be by the nature of storytelling. So it has to have a beginning, middle, and end, and you have to have specific points every player is going to go through. But when we design these things, we really craft those moments to be emotionally impactful regardless of how you approach them or your choices that you make. And that's just always, it's kind of like almost second nature to us now. That's always kind of how we've developed these games. Tim and I have this weird symbiosis between, like, I have this very dark worldview and he has kind of like a more silly worldview, and we put those things together and really come up with this kind of tone that Brian was referencing, this very dark humor.
Yeah, yeah. I recall from our conversations when I came down and visited the studio that player choice is something that's super important for everybody at the studio. But equally important is that those choices feel like they have like real consequences within the world. And I'd like to hear you speak a little bit about how you communicate and reinforce that sense of consequence and meaning for the players, so that it's not just, I do this thing and I made that call, but that you're actually thinking about, like, I made that call and this happened.
Well, the whole game changes how things play out depending on things that you do. From smaller choices, choosing to kill somebody like Clive.
Yeah.
Catherine's going to react to that. If you go back to Catherine and try to get her to deal with Clive, that's going to change the outcome of it. So there's that kind of thing, but there's also the major issue of the game, or the major choice in the game is, are you going to side with the scientist who rescued you, or are you going to join with the corporate board against him? Though you have all along the spectrum choices to make in the game, and the game reacts accordingly, whether it's through dialogue choices or people who attack you or your reputation changes. And then we have the companions who also interact with that whole system as well and give you kind of feedback on what you're doing.
Do your companions get ticked off at you?
In specific instances, it won't be a surprise to you. They're very, they have their own likes and dislikes and their passions and things that they care about. They all have their own side quest for you to do. But there's one of our characters who's very much anti the board or against the board. And so it's very obvious that if you side with the board, he's going to be very upset. And Brian was talking about the leadership abilities. If you put points into that, you can convince him, no, it's okay. We're gonna side with the board, and it's really a good idea. If you haven't put your points into leadership, he might get really upset with you and leave.
Yeah.
At certain points, those things happen.
Sure. The Outer Worlds is rooted in a sense of something that feels, from the outside, like absurdism. But a lot of the characters in this world don't feel it's absurd at all, right? Like, they've lived their entire lives under this system. And I'm curious about how you're thinking that will play to a person playing the game, right? Like, as you run into these individuals that just seem to believe what, especially to us, as not sci-fi futuristic people, just reads as total nonsense, right?
Right. Well, I think some of the humor comes from that you approach a character who you maybe as a player have a totally different outlook, or as this character in the world coming from Earth and being awoken are not steeped into the corporate culture of the Halcyon colony. You'll see something that seems a completely logical idea, and the response you get is like, what? You can not show up to work when you're sick? What? What kind of weird world is this you're talking about? And they just are so indoctrinated into this worldview that the corporate profit is the most important thing, and the best thing to be in life is to be an indentured contract employee of one of the corporations. And that's basically from birth they've been raised to believe that.
Like, they aspire to that.
Basically the idea of being lucky enough to get an indenture contract is a great thing for that parents want for their children.
Sure.
And because they believe this so firmly, the way they approach the world, that I think adds a lot of the humor of the game, is that they'll just accept things and believe things wholeheartedly that just, when you're approaching, you're like, that just sounds wacky, but it's the way they believe things, and everyone around them supports it as well.
That's one of the reasons in games we've made previously, and in this game, we really like the player to kind of be an outsider, or the player character to be an outsider, so the player and the player character kind of start in the same spot.
Right.
And to be able to see what's going on here. Yes, we talk about corporations and all that, but the bigger themes are about stories and who controls the story you're telling yourself. And so when the player comes in, they see these people being controlled by the board propaganda, where they haven't grown up that way. And we always want to make these characters feel very believable, even though they're in an absurd situation. having been raised in that situation and talking to them, they should sound like believable individuals, even though, yes, it does have this humor and this absurdism to it.
Right, right. I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that element of dark humor. I have to imagine that writing to that sensibility has some particular challenges. I mean, surely there are times that you feel like something has stepped over the line, where you go from, this is less darkly humorous and more just bleak and morose, or do you not? Is it that like the further you go down that way, the more it feels like that's really funny?
It depends. It's a case-by-case thing.
Yeah.
It's really, I don't want to say second nature, but it's very much in mine and Tim's personalities to kind of create that type of humor. And working with our writers and designers, it was a little bit of a growing process in figuring out how we're all gonna write to that. But in the end, I think it's I don't really even recall. There were certain specifics, like we have very specific details about our lore, about how the world works. The world should feel very low tech, and we don't want to reference things that seem almost second nature for people to reference in a sci-fi game, for instance, because we're very specific about the tone. We actually had more issues with dialing that in with our writing than the humor. I think it's pretty obvious actually to all of us once we get in this mode where that line is. And I don't want to get into too many details because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's all in how you handle it. I mean, the situation is very bleak, and I mean, this is a very, very bleak colony and world and situation for all these people. This colony is on the edge. It's not in a good way.
Yeah.
And for you to come into this situation and interact with us could be very bleak, very depressing, but it's a game, so it should be fun. Games should be entertaining and fun, and we really wanted to contrast the lightness of how we write these things and kind of deal with them with some of that bleakness to not make it just this dour experience that's not really fun.
Sure.
Thank you, appreciate that.
When I saw the game several months back, you guys weren't ready to show off Monarch, and that's kind of the centerpiece of what you're showing off here at E3. And Brian, during the demo, you talked a little bit about the history of this place and how it's different, but I wanted to go into a little bit greater depth there, but especially as it relates to the other main planet that you guys have showcased, right? The Terra 2 and Roseway and places like that. How are these places different in terms of the people that you're encountering there, the overall sense of gameplay space, all that kind of good stuff?
Well, I think the primary visual difference between the two planets is that Terra 2, which is the main corporate planet in the system, that's where the terraforming was more successful than it was on Monarch. So it does look a bit more Earth-like, although there are still various, not all of the plants and animals are entirely from Earth. They're maybe evolved through the terraforming process to look a little bit different, versus Monarch, where it failed, where it's much more like the native Halcyon life. So visually, they are very distinct between the two locations. I think because Terra 2 is the corporate homeworld, and the corporations are very much in control, everyone has very much indoctrinated into the idea that the corporate model is the best and the brightest, and that's what everyone aspires to. Whereas Monarch, people are more disillusioned after being abandoned by the board and kind of betrayed in a way by the people who run the colony. They're much more willing to find other options and to try and break free of the corporate model, even though in some cases you have Monarch Stellar Industries, which is the main corporation that runs the planet, is trying to find a gentler, happier version of corporate control that they can impose on things. But even then, there's people who are saying, no, screw that. We're not going to go with that approach. And that's some of the tension you feel on Monarch. So I think the quests you'll find on Terra 2 are much more about being within the corporate structure and the corporate model and its successes and failures versus being on Monarch, which is much more the counterpoint of, no, let's screw the man. Let's go a different way.
Yeah. Are the play spaces themselves different in meaningful ways? I mean, I remember what I saw of Terra 2, and some of those individual spaces were kind of contained spaces, and my understanding is that Monarch has a little bit more kind of more open.
Yeah, Monarch
quality
is our
to it.
largest area that we've created for the game, so there's a lot more space to roam around and find like unique locations. Like Fallbrook is just one of the townships on Monarch. It's not even the main one. It's one we kind of centered on for this demo because it has a great visual look. But within there's also like Stellar Bay is actually like the main city on the planet of Monarch, and others that have been like when the board abandoned were kind of like left to their own and are now inhabited by wildlife or marauders or various other factions on the planet that you can explore. So it's definitely like the much larger area to explore around. On Terra 2, because it is more controlled by the corporate board, your ability as a freelancer captain to travel around is a bit more restricted. So we have areas that are a bit more contained around whatever a specific corporation is controlling and what your ability to access those points are.
Awesome. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about one of my favorite things in the game, which is the element of world building you guys have done with these companies, these brands, which is not something that you really think about in a lot of role-playing games. But we're going to like have this big conversation around fictional companies, but it's really core to what's happening in this setting, and so I just would love to hear you guys talk about what some of these companies are, what they do, and maybe if either of you have personal favorites, whether because they're especially funny or because they're really weird or dark or whatever.
I like Spacer's Choice because they're just crappy. They make just stuff that falls apart, and they're everywhere. And the funnier thing about them is you would think in terms of the corporate board and the corporate pecking order that they'd be at the bottom, but they're actually a wholly owned subsidiary of this company called Universal Defense Logistics, who runs the whole colony. They're at the head of the board, and also they run the prison. So the fact that one of their main slogans is "Taste the Freedom" is a little bit ironic. And then there's Auntie Cleo's, who makes antibiotics. Tim just loves puns like that. And then there's a whole bunch of armor companies and weapon companies, and there's the different weapon companies and armor companies each have their own specifics about how their armor is made. There's a company called T&L that makes really high-end things. It's more expensive. They break down a lot less, but they're more expensive to repair, whereas you can find Spacer's Choice weapons everywhere, and they're very easy to repair. Spacer's Choice kind of makes everything. Most of the other companies are kind of like very specialized. There was an old Rizzo's place on Monarch. C&P owned that factory before Clive took it over. Yeah. Is there any other ones you want
I think
to?
Rizzo's is my favorite corporation. They're like the more candy-themed company. They're much like brighter colors and more like colorful as far as overall presentation. And like, some of the products, like they have Tim comes up with these like just crazy drinks for them they produce, like lemon slap and purple berry punch. Yeah, and a few others that I
Really
don't wanna say
healthy
right
stuff.
now.
Yes.
Yes, totally healthy for you.
Yeah.
Not at all rotting your teeth, that kind of thing. But basically, one of the things I think is great is like the various corporations, they all have a personality, they all have kind of an identity and feel that through the various products and consumables you can find in the game help reinforce that.
Yeah.
And so recently we had to go through and we were doing descriptions for all the items, and Tim just went through and like wrote these wacky descriptions for a lot of our consumables. And half the fun was like going through and like just reading out what the various like little slogans and brands for them are.
Right. I like that aspect of it, that it's not just that because you're right, they're almost like characters in the game, these different brands, but it's also that as a character in that universe, you're forced to interact with this stuff. I mean, these are the items that exist in this universe for you to heal or to eat, right?
Yes.
And so,
well, I think it's also like one of the things with the corporations, they all sponsor their own tossball teams, which is like the main sport in the colony. Right. So you have various, like one of your companions is like a huge tossball fan and a very specific team fan. Okay. And you actually, one of the ways you acquire him is because he got into a fight, basically a brawl, because of someone being disrespectful towards his favorite team. So like that entire well, obviously corporate sponsorship of sports is not a surprise in our world, but it's taken to a new level in the Halcyon colony.
Has someone in the studio gone and like made the rules for tossball?
No, not specifically. And how can I put this? it's something that we don't want people to really be able to understand.
Right.
It's supposed
As
to
if it's
feel
more
like
nonsense?
it's like if you're in a, let's say you don't know a lot about football and you're in a room full of people who are talking football stats and I have no idea what you people are talking about.
Right, right.
It's supposed to always have that kind of feel about it.
Fair enough. Between the two of you, there's a lot of years of work on games that featured memorable party member characters. So if I was going to go home tomorrow and start building the next great party-based RPG, what advice would you give me? What makes for compelling individuals like the ones that you guys are trying to build for the Outer Worlds to join your party? I mean, how do you know that you've hit on the right mix of personalities for the wider group, and that, okay, let's stop here, and this feels right now?
It's very iterative. We like to start, well, we start a couple different ways, because I'm just thinking over how we develop the ones that are in this game.
Yeah.
Because I would tell you things like, find archetypes and kind of turn them on their head, and we did that in a couple places, but a lot of it can be very organic. Like we started coming up with, for the very original announcement, demo that we showed off had Felix and Ellie. Those were the first two companions we came up with, and they just kind of started as just characters that were, very much like a one-line description, and then as we kind of worked with them, we kind of found out who they were. And then once you start getting more characters, you kind of balance and refine each of the characters in not opposition, but to work together, to feel really good together, to be complementary to each other, and to make sure, when we're saying that we have to have a good spread of skills for each of the companions. So what would it make sense for this companion's skills to be? Because one of the things that we didn't get to show off as much here is that they do reinforce your skills. Mm-hmm. So you might choose different companions when you're going out into the world. If you know you're going to be doing a lot of lock picking, you pick your companion that helps you there,
Sure.
or helps you with your dialogue skills. I just think, for me personally, and Brian could talk to how he thinks it's good to approach it. For me, it's always thinking of characters that are unexpected. There's at least some element that's counter to what you would expect that character to be.
Yeah, I think one of the ways you mentioned, like how you're successful, is one of the ways I know, like for the Outer Worlds team, when you're talking with various designers and writers about like who their favorite companion is, nobody agrees. Everyone has a different point of view on who their favorite companion is and why they like to take them with them on when they're playing through the game.
I think that'd
And
be
you'll have
good,
arguments.
right?
Yeah, exactly. That's it's successful, because you know that you've created characters that appeal to different people, different personalities, and when people are arguing back and forth, they have different points that are all equally valid, that just depending on the situation and the reasons why you're playing through and what you're trying to accomplish, different companions are better or more entertaining or more fun to interact with.
And then there's always, we really worked a lot on how they interact with each other. When you're running around with two companions, they'll sometimes just start talking back and forth. If you're in a conversation with somebody, and this person maybe is espousing corporate stuff, that Felix, the companion who's really anti the board, might chime in and start like arguing with him, and then your other companion, who maybe is a little bit more pro board, might be jump in there as well. So it's not just them individually and their relationship to you, it's also their relationship with each other. So when you're taking companions, there's all these out with you in the field, there's all these things to consider. Besides just skills, it's like, how do they interact with each other? Who's the most fun to take together?
Yeah. Well, let's continue with that thread of talking about the companions and talk about one of the innovations that the game is exploring, which is the leadership play style. I'm curious if you could enlighten folks a little bit about what makes that play style different from what we've seen before in a lot of other games, including other games from Obsidian. If I'm a player that's focusing on leadership to the exclusion of, say, some of the more traditional role-playing game skills, tell me how that's going to play out in the game. What is that going to do in terms of what I do with my companions and how the actual gameplay unfolds?
I'm trying to think what we can actually talk about.
Well, just in a general sense, when you play a leadership-focused character, it's almost like you're in command of a squad. You don't tell them specific actions to do, but you really use them as weapons in and of themselves. You'll send them in to clear out areas. You perk up being able to have their companion abilities recharge faster. They can be a little bit overpowered sometimes. It feels really different when you're playing with them as kind of your front line,
Right.
which is it's kind of a different feel for a game like this as opposed to you always being the hero out front. This is more of a different personality to your character type.
I know I was talking to Tim. He'd recently played the game as a leadership character just to like see what the full experience was like.
Yeah.
He was kind of trying to do like a leadership pacifist route through the game.
Okay.
And he was saying he felt like he was a conflicted pacifist because he was not shooting anybody himself, but sending his companions in to do it. And it's like, technically I'm ordering them to kill people, but I'm not getting my hands dirty, so everything's fine.
That sounds more like a mob boss approach.
Exactly.
To be
He
very
is sublight.
friendly with Catherine. I think the other really important thing about the leadership is how they, just how the whole thing fits together.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just what we really wanted to do with the companions was make them integral to the play experience. You don't have to take them, but we put a lot of work into making them accentuate the player.
Sure.
And just having them there and being able to do that with them just casts the whole thing in a different light.
Sure. One of the things that shows up in this demo that I did not want to skip past because it's something that I don't know that you've really talked about extensively before is the idea of weapon modding. I wonder if you can go into any more detail about what's going on there with weapon modding and what sort of flexibility it gives you as a player to change the way a favorite weapon works or shoots or anything like that.
So basically with the modding system, it's something that you will find mods available throughout the world, like different pieces of equipment, either from vendors or lying around in the world or as quest rewards that you can then apply to the weapons or even armor that you have on your character. And they can do various things, whether it's like just taking the overall stats of the weapon and making them better, like increasing the range of a weapon, increasing the distance that it shoots, or range, distance, same thing, the clip size of the weapon.
Yeah.
Or even like changing like a weapon entirely, like we showed in the demo the heavy machine gun that was now doing shock damage. So basically you got a heavy machine taser that you could use against a bunch of enemies.
Yeah.
And like my favorites are actually some of the armor mods that you can apply to the armor that you can acquire. Like there's things where you can get a like electric field that applies to your armor that when you get hit by a melee attack will knock back your attacker. So if you're more of a ranged character, it allows you to deal with those melee characters and get up close. Or one of the ones that we had on this character for when we were doing the stealth route is actually one that's like reduces the sound radius of the footsteps. So as you're sneaking, makes it much easier for you to sneak through the environment. And based on like what skills you have on the character, your ability to apply those mods and how much it costs to do so will actually change. So they're basically it makes you more flexible. It lets you again play the game the way you want to play, which is really what we focus on at Obsidian.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we're coming near to the end of things now with the time that we have, but before we close things out, I wanted to just ask each of you if there's anything else you wanted to share with the folks out there that I know I've spoken to a lot of E3 attendees who are like, Outer Worlds, man, looking really hot. What is there any last things you want to share with folks before we depart the stage?
All I can say is that if you've been fans of our games in the past, this is going to be something that you're really going to fall in love with. We're really proud of what we've done. Our team is fantastic. Everybody's just done great work, and it's just really fun. I mean, when you're playing this game, you not only are making choices the first time around, you're like thinking about the choices you can make next time around as well.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Thank
you very much.